Let's turn to 1 Kings chapter 4, please. 1 Kings chapter 4. I want to spend just a few minutes there and then kind of work into a little bit of a review period of time. And so just for us to remember where we are, and we came out of class on Sunday, we see Solomon. He's just kind of in that kingly role now and given great wisdom by God. And do you remember the challenge of his wisdom? Do you remember the event that happened there as we were closing up class where his wisdom was challenged? Do you remember that? What was it? 2 women and a baby. You know, a dead baby and a live baby. And Solomon said, bring me a sword and we'll cut him in half. And, you know, remember that happened? And the real mother says, no, don't do that. You know, let the other one have it. And Solomon knew now who was the real mother. And what chapter 3 and verse 28 says right there, that conclusion, when all Israel heard the verdict the king had given, they held the king in awe because they saw that he had wisdom from God to administer justice. And just in so many ways, this is when Solomon became king. I mean, yeah, I know he was already anointed before that. There had been some time. But now is the point where Israel looks to him and says, and they're saying, he's our king. He's the king that God has anointed and put into place. So as we go forward just a little bit here into chapter 4, see in chapter 4, the latter part of that chapter, and we see again some reminded here about Solomon's great wisdom that happened here. Let me see here. My pages are out of order. Just hang on. Actually, I want the earlier part of chapter 4. In the early part of chapter 4, Solomon organizes his kingdom. We're not going to read all of this right here, all these names and all. But still, what we just want to be able to see is that, again, as Solomon he's in charge now and putting some things in order. There were some people that were in place and position that he's taken out because he doesn't have confidence in them. Just because they were in the last administration doesn't mean they're going to be in this one. You know, Zadok and Abiathar were high priests, but Abiathar is going out. He's banished from office. You know, Zadok somewhere along the line must have retired because now we're going to start reading about Azariah, his son, taking over. Benaiah becomes the commander of Solomon's army. Joab is no more, remember? And the list here of names and positions go on. Continuing in chapter 4, verses 7 and following, we see that there are 12 district princes put in place. This is kind of interesting. I mean, we know there are 12 tribes, right? But we have these district princes or governors. I'm not sure that exactly lines up to the 12 tribes or not. But at this point, everybody knows what tribe they're a part of. But the reason for this is some responsibilities are being shared out here. You know, there was food that had to come into Jerusalem to supply the king and his court. And this part's like really amazing to me. In chapter 4, verse 20, we read this, where it says, the people of Judah and Israel were as numerous as the sand on the seashore. They ate, they drank, and they were happy. And Solomon ruled over all the kingdoms from the river to the land of the Philistines as far as the border of Egypt. These countries brought tribute and were Solomon's subjects all of his life. Just getting in position in our mind here, how far the kingdom goes right now. Now what's interesting, verse 22, Solomon's daily provisions were 30 cores of fine flour, 60 cores of meal. Let's kind of look at this up here. I got it in terms we understand. 185 bushels of fine flour, 375 bushels of meal, 10 fattened calves, 20 pasture-fed cattle, 100 sheep and goats, plus other things every day. You think about that for a moment. This is the king's provisions for the king and those of his court. How many are in his court? I mean, a bunch. Every day there is this much. You almost think like, well, you could feed half the country for that. Every day. And so when we think about those 12 districts that are out there, okay, they're going to share in responsibility by the month, bringing food, for the king and for his court, is how that's going to be and how that's going to happen. I think that's rather interesting. And so, here, if you remember back to 1 Samuel chapter 8, and what was told to Israel at that time, Samuel's prediction, Samuel the prophet, who was saying, okay, you want a king? Okay, here's how that's going to work. The king will take your sons and your daughters. The king will keep some of your sons for his staff. And they'll take other sons for plowing and for reaping. The king's going to take 1/10 of your flock. This list goes on and on. We're familiar with that. And more or less what we're seeing right now is, yeah, that's exactly the way it is. That's how it works with that king. So, God had responded generously to Solomon's request, for wisdom, and Solomon ruled well. We see, if we can kind of consider a couple of maps right here, let's just think about this for a moment. In the days of King Saul, we have this area or this region here that Saul was able to capture. He was a good warrior, and God was with him in that period of time, and they conquered a lot of the land that was around. But in the day of David, over here, there was expansion of the area that they controlled. Now, Israel lived up in here, the 12 tribes. But still, David was in command and control of all of this area here. Remember, some of these were the enemies, right? Edom and Moab and Ammon. But David had control of these. They paid tribute to David. And when we come to the time of Solomon, we have that. And even more. Solomon's conquered all the way up to the Euphrates River, all the way up here. And so the way Scripture reads, and some of this is interesting, there was safety that was known from Dan to Beersheba. Kind of a common phrase, from Dan to Beersheba. Dan being up here, to the north area down here. Beersheba is down here. The length of Israel, where they lived is the idea. And then there was this phrase that is used, each man had his own vine and fig tree. Like, what is that supposed to mean? What's the idea? Each man had his own vine and fig tree. What's that infer? What's that? They're well off. They had something. There used to be a phrase. So Jordan, you ever hear this phrase where it's like, there's 2 cars in every driveway? You ever hear that? Okay, so a lot of young people go like, so that's all you ever know. Oh no, back in the 50s, now some of you, I see you smiling. Some of the older folks are smiling, like, yeah, I remember that. After World War II, there was some prosperity. Some sign of prosperity was 2 cars in every driveway. Well, that was Israel. They had 2 cars in every driveway. They all had their own vine and fig tree. There was some prosperity there. A chicken in every pot, that's right. So there was some prosperity. Well, that was Israel. So during this time, of Solomon, it was kind of that way. There was peace on every side, is what chapter 4 helps us to see and understand. And of course, that's what God promised. That's what God said to David, that your son is going to reign and going to serve. He's not going to be going to battle. There's going to be peace. The kingdom has been expanded. And so God had very generously, given Solomon what he needed.
We don't really get a lot of what the Israelites were doing during this time, but I wonder if they attributed this peace and prosperity to God in any shape or form.
I hope that they understand and see that and know that, but that's a good question. It's just like when there's peace and prosperity that we have and enjoy, do we appreciate where that comes from? History would seem to tell me that that's not always the case, that we don't always understand or appreciate those things. In chapter 4, verse 29, let's read just a little bit. God gave Solomon wisdom and very great insight, and a breadth of understanding as measureless as the sand on the seashore. Solomon's wisdom was greater than the wisdom of all the men of the East, and greater than all the wisdom of Egypt. You know, that's quite a statement right there, isn't it? I mean, where could you go to find greater wisdom than what Israel had with Solomon?
Verse 29, something, because we always talk about his wisdom, and which was miraculously given, but something to point out to the children is with that an exceedingly great understanding and largeness of heart.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Because you can be as smart or as wise as you think you are, but if your heart's not in the right place, if you don't have largeness of heart, it's wasted. And it points out that he had, and I don't know if I've ever heard that talked about with Solomon, but it points out that he had more.
Okay, good point. You know, I think there could be some explanation that has to be given. We're thinking about those who are teaching in the youth classes next quarter. To give some explanation to, you know, the sand on the seashore. Well, how do you measure that? How do you count that? Well, you can't, right? You can't. So great was Solomon's wisdom. How could you wrap that up? You know, that's how great his wisdom was that way. He goes on to say in verse 31, and his fame spread to all the surrounding nations. He spoke 3,000 proverbs, and his songs numbered 1,005. And he described plant life, from the cedar of Lebanon to the hyssop that grows out of walls. He also taught about animals and birds and reptiles and fish. Men of all nations came to listen to Solomon's wisdom, and sent by all the kings of the world who had heard of his wisdom. You know, you ever just get tired of that guy who thinks he knows it all? Solomon actually did. I mean, he could talk about farming, he could talk about animals, he could talk about trees, he could talk about just whatever there was. He had wisdom to talk about all of those things. And he was recognized that way by all the nations and the kings who were around. All right, other thoughts or comments here about these things? Let's spend just a few minutes here. We're going to kind of back up a little bit. How far are we going to back up? We're going to back up all the way to this. Let's just spend a few minutes kind of talking about where we've been, where we've come from. You know, it was a year ago that we started this class. We started this series, you know, of working our way through the Bible story. It was a year ago that we've been doing this. And so now look at how many books of the Bible we've been through, periods of time, generations, Bible characters that we've studied about and talked about. Let's be reminded of some of those just a little bit tonight. We've talked about these 17 Bible periods. Well, you know, we're about halfway through that, which seems like that's pretty incredible in this year, just a little bit more period of time, all of these Bible stories. And we've talked about the idea that the whole Bible story is intertwined. And this is the thing that I hope that we are understanding and we are taking away from this study this way. That the whole Bible, that, you know, people say, well, how many stories are there in the Bible? I don't know, hundreds. But in the big picture, there's one. And if we say that there is one Bible story, what is that? What would you say? If there's one Bible story, what would you say? Psst, psst, psst. I hear psst, I can't. Psst, 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 psst.
Story of salvation.
The story of salvation. Go with that some more. Tell me, what is this one Bible story? Preparation? Okay, preparation for the coming of Christ. We're going to see this lineage that runs all the way through. Go some more. That we have an opportunity of everlasting life. This is the big story going back to this salvation, the redemption. Can we just say, the Bible story is about the redemption of mankind. Does that give us a picture of the whole? Now, there are a whole lot of stories in here that we stack up that take us through. But that is the theme. From the beginning to the end, from Genesis to Revelation. It's about God saving mankind. It's redemption of mankind. And so that's the big picture of this. And so we started with this, the creation. So we start talking about the creation. I want you to tell me some things in this period of time. Some things that happened. You almost can't mess this up. All right? I mean, unless you say, well, in creation, we read about salvation in Jesus. Well, guess what? That's not even wrong. Actually, we do get a glimpse of that, right? But let's narrow it up. Tell me about some events. And we can't have... Let's move quick here. Give me some events that happened in this period of creation. What do we see? First sin. What else? Tower of Babel.
6 days of creation.
6 days of creation. That's a good starting point. In the beginning, God created. Okay, so we have this beginning place. Tell me something about that. Give me some quick points. Perfection ruined by man's faults. We see for 6 days that God has put in place his creation in just the way he wants, and he said it is good every day. And at the end, he created mankind, and he provided for mankind. Created woman to be a helper for man. When we see the first man and woman, Adam and Eve, and it was good. God said it was. See, first, before it got messed up, God said, and it was good. God was pleased. But then someone mentioned the first sin. And so we're introduced to sin in chapter 3. Give me a couple quick points with there was sin. Okay? What's that look like?
Questioning God's authority.
Questioning God's authority. Good. What else? As Satan said, you'll surely not die. Okay, God said you would. Listen to God. What else? What do we see with sin? There's a big point here with sin. What happens when we sin? Separation. They're cast out of the garden. There is separation from God when there is sin. All right, so we talked about creation. Then there's the period of the flood. Give me some quick points. The period of the flood. The world reset. Back that up just a little bit. What happens first?
Meat was given for food when they got off.
Say it again.
Meat was given for food when they got off.
Okay. Back up. What happens first?
The world descended into
Wickedness. The world was just out of sight. Separated from God. God saw evil. What's God's plan?
wipe it out.
He's going to wipe out the world. But everyone was not wiped out. Why?
Noah and his family were faithful.
Noah and his family. See, God offered grace. I don't want us to walk away from this not seeing this incredibly huge point. There was grace that was given. And Noah found favor in the eyes of God. And Noah listened to what God said. And he and his family were saved. By God's grace is what happened. So we had this period of the flood. Noah walked with God is what the text tells us. Noah accepted God's grace and took the escape from sin that was offered. And after the flood, God made a covenant with Noah. Covenant starts becoming a very important point as we go through some of these periods of time. There is this scattering of the people that comes and take place. Man grew in number, all spoke one language, but this was not going to help God's purpose, and he separated and split people up. Generations continued to grow in number, but now more than ever, we start following one people, the people that are chosen by God. And so we come to this period of time of the patriarchs. Give me some points about the patriarchs. What or whom are we speaking about? One of the greatest examples of faith in the Bible is Abram. Okay? Tell me something. Well, what happens through Abram?
First glimpses of Messiah.
First glimpses of the Messiah. There's some promises made. Tell me something about the promises that are made. Genesis chapter 12, promise of a great nation, a land promise, seed promise, going back to the ideas of salvation, which is going to come through Jesus. Abram's lineage becomes very important, and we see Isaac, and we see Jacob then, his son, grandson, the 12 sons of Jacob. Boy, they become a very important part of this overall story. We come to the Exodus. Tell me something about the Exodus.
Hebrews in bondage.
The Hebrews in bondage.
Get another salvation through water.
Another salvation through water. How is that?
Well, as Noah, God's select people, survived the flood through water,
Mm-hmm.
so too does God's select people here escape from sinful bondage
Through
the
water?
Red Sea.
Through the Red Sea. Okay, good. So the scene takes kind of a dark turn in many ways in Exodus. There are 2 million Israelites. They are in bondage, but God provides a mean for their escape and separation from Pharaoh. We read about a man named Moses, who becomes the key player here in the book of Exodus and books that are to follow. Exodus from Egypt. We see the safety of the people when they get to Mount Sinai. What happens at Mount Sinai? Say it. What? A covenant. A covenant. God makes a covenant with his people. Remember, there's a covenant with his people that is made there. We get into the wilderness wandering because faith fails in Israel. How so? What led to the wilderness wandering? Rejecting what the spies said. There were only 2 spies that said, yes, we can. God will take us into the land. We can capture the land. 10 spies said, oh no, we can't do it. Israel listened to the 10. Faith failed. 40 years of wilderness wandering is what happened and followed that. 40 years, a generation dies. Think about some of the things that happened in the wilderness. Tell me something real quick about these miracles. God demonstrates his power. In Numbers chapter 16, rebellion was dealt with. Do you remember what that was about? Numbers chapter 16. You remember Kohath and his family? Well, what did they try to do?
They claimed equality with Moses.
Claimed equality with Moses. Moses was the one that God chose to lead them. They came to a point in time where some others wanted that position and tried to discredit Moses. How did that work for them? Ask the earth, because they were swallowed by the earth. And Moses, the position of Moses was secured and demonstrated again. In chapter 17, Moses was reaffirmed as that leader. The water from a rock in Numbers chapter 20. What's the lesson that comes from that? Numbers chapter 20, the water from the rock, or lessons. You remember?
God, whenever you're frustrated.
What's that?
Listen to God even whenever you're frustrated.
Listen to God even when you're frustrated. Who was frustrated? Why was Moses frustrated? What's that? Stiff-necked people. And so how did Moses mess up here? Struck that rock. And? What did it?
We provide water for you.
Must we provide water? Where's the we at in this? Did not give credit to God. What happened to Moses? Didn't enter into the promised land, because of this. This all happens in that period of the Exodus and the wilderness wandering. Then we get into the period of conquest of the land. Tell me something about that.
Third salvation through water.
Third salvation by water. How so?
Well, Joshua, which is the Hebrew version of Jesus, in the name form anyway, leads the people out of a wilderness wandering through water to the promise.
over the Jordan River into the land, to conquer the land. Moses now is the leader of the children of Israel. And God told Joshua several times, be strong and courageous. And there were battles that were won by God with the children of Israel. There was no enemy that they could not overcome. Conquest by the power of God. I hope that's something that's kind of high on our memory list in this period of time. That as they conquered the land piece by piece, it had everything to do with the fact God was with them. Israel didn't always have the biggest army, remember? And yet when God was with them, they would win the battle every time. The period of the Judges, I kind of think that's been my least favorite period so far. What about you? Does anybody, hey, that's my favorite period. Anybody say that about the Judges? No? Yeah, you like it.
It's good to learn from.
It is good to learn from. Because what is the big picture of what we learn from the Judges? Tell me.
God is very merciful.
God is merciful because we need mercy. Because what we see during that period of time over and over again is Israel forgetting their way and moving far from God. And when they got low enough, when they were finally on their knees and willing to repent, God would send them what? A deliverer. He would send them a deliverer to rescue them. And when they repented and turned to God, what did God do? He took them. He accepted them. Every time he took them back is what he did. Okay. All right. So we've been talking about just most recently the United Kingdom. And we're going to be moving out of that before we know it. But here in the United Kingdom, God answered their plea of give us a king, but that plea of give us a king was in so many ways a rejection of God. Who was their king? God gave them earthly kings. We've studied about Saul and David and now Solomon. And very quickly we'll be moving beyond Solomon and we'll be going into a period of the divided kingdom. And that's going to be the next section that we come to. Whew. Okay, that was really fast. What are some other comments or thoughts you have about any of that? Or about where we are now? What would you say? Yes.
If you're teaching like fifth grade and up, to point out in chapter 3 where it talks about Solomon's wisdom being known of the world, he was still a very young man.
Yes.
People think around 20, and I think that's what amazed people so. And what we can tell our children is he was that way because he listened to God. God did give him miraculous wisdom, but we can be children and teenagers, wise teenagers, if we're listening and following God's word and people who believe in God.
We can enjoy wisdom too. Wisdom that comes from God. It's not given to us miraculously as it was Solomon. But Solomon becomes a training ground for us and some things that we need to teach our children about. And we talk about, we'll make a brief review of the book of Ecclesiastes here in just a few weeks, believed to be written by Solomon. What a book of wisdom. And what a book to share with some of our young people. The book of Ecclesiastes and the wisdom that Solomon picked up and he learned through an experiment of life. Okay, what else? What else comes to mind of where we've been the last year? Anything else you want to mention?
I think that Joshua charged the people to make their choice.
He did.
In my house, I will serve the Lord. So we need to make a conviction in our heart, no matter what age, even young.
I love that. That's right. And as parents, something that we need to be teaching our children about. And what we are going to do is we're going to follow the Lord. And we go to Joshua chapter 24. And we read that with them. Here's the charge that Solomon put before Israel. As for me and my house, we are going to serve the Lord. Let's teach them about doing that and challenge them with that, for sure. All right. Well, it's been a very quick year in our study, and it's been exciting, I think. But there's some really exciting stuff still to come. And so, God willing, on Sunday, we get into chapter 5 through 7. 1 Kings, chapter 5 through 7. Will you read that? Read through that. And let's be ready on Sunday to kind of continue on with that. Very thankful that you're here tonight. Thank you for coming.